This is your first program in the series on world history. It is about prehistoric man and the first civilizations. The emphasis in this program and in the rest of the series is on Western world history. World history is a study of man and civilizations. By civilizations, we mean an advanced stage of human culture which includes living within a social framework. We will trace the development of civilizations from the first evidence we have through the 20th century space-age civilization. We will take a brief look at prehistoric times and then move into recorded history, which is referred to as world history. The period of recorded history has occupied a very short time in man's existence. Writing was invented only about 6,500 years ago, while man has existed almost 100 times as long. For this reason, we will begin with an examination of early man in the years before anyone could possibly record the everyday happenings and thoughts that were later called history. Evidence indicates that man's ancestors originated in Africa. One of the first man-like creatures, called Australopithecines, developed about 2 million years ago. These creatures were much like apes in appearance, but they had a human-shaped brain case and were able to stand erect. A larger brain enabled the Australopithecine man to make crude tools out of stone. The changes that took place in climate are important in understanding human evolution. Australopithecine man developed during a very warm period in the Earth's history. Gradually, his offspring began moving north. Later, as the climate became colder, man would be forced to flee south in order to live. The climatic changes are partially responsible for the widespread distribution of early man. On what continent did the first man-like creatures develop? Yes, Africa is the continent with the largest area of temperate and tropic zones. What factor is partially responsible for the widespread distribution of early man in many parts of the world? Yes, between 100,000 and 50,000 BC, a more refined form of man developed. This early man was called Neanderthal man. He lived in caves throughout what is now Europe and Asia. The Neanderthal man was much more intelligent than his ancestors. He developed many useful tools by carefully chipping stone as well as shaping bone and wood. The Neanderthal man probably invented the spear. This early invention made it possible for the hunter to stand at a distance and kill game. Australopithecine man had used only stones and had probably found hunting a deadly combination of luck and quickness. But now, for the first time, Neanderthal man had begun to have some control over the environment around him. By approximately 30,000 BC, Cro-Magnon man had evolved. Cro-Magnon man is considered to be the first modern man because he looked much like man looks today. Although Cro-Magnon man was a hunter like Neanderthal man had been, he used much more sophisticated tools. Beautiful cave drawings and rude clay figures show that Cro-Magnons were the first known artists. They also had a form of religion and a fairly complex language which leads scholars to believe that they had one of the earliest systems of social organization. The spear was probably one of the first of many attempts by primitive man to control the environment around him. Which primitive man probably invented the spear? Yes. Which primitive man do we consider to be the first modern man? Right. By about 10,000 to 7,000 BC, the climate began to get much warmer, much the same as it is today. Many of the game animals that primitive man had hunted either died out altogether or moved north. In order to stay alive, early man gradually stopped nomadic hunting and began farming. We call these first farmers Mesolithic men. Meso means middle, and lithic means stone. Mesolithic man planted crops and domesticated dogs. Small groups of these people lived in North Africa, Asia, and the Near East. Although he had no permanent villages at this time, Mesolithic man stayed in the same area long enough to plant and harvest crops. There is some evidence that cattle and horses may have been kept by these people for eating purposes. The first advance toward civilization was farming and domestication of animals. Which primitive people stayed in one area long enough to plant and harvest a crop instead of depending solely on hunting? Right. About 7,000 BC, Neolithic man is thought to have established the first permanent settlement. Neo means new. Neolithic man planted crops in the same locality year after year. He built permanent shelters and established a type of communal living. This shift to a permanent community way of living is so important that it is called the Neolithic Revolution. Neolithic man stopped chipping crude tools and weapons. He polished his tools and began to bake clay pottery for domestic use. Neolithic man lived during a period known as the Stone Age, when stone was used as the primary material for cutting tools and weapons, and lasted until the development of metal tools. What event in prehistory was so important that it is called the Neolithic Revolution? Yes, between 5600 and 3500 BC, man had progressed into the last prehistoric period. This period is called the Copper Stone or Chalcolithic Age. Chalco means copper. Communities had become more complex, and organized religion was practiced in these societies. Man had begun to use metals for tools and ornaments. Copper was sometimes used for tools, but it had not replaced stone. Man's life has been greatly affected by the kind of tools which were used. What was the last prehistoric age of man called? Right. These prehistoric periods gave rise to the first important civilizations in historic times. These civilizations developed in 4 river valleys, generally known as the cradles of civilization. One of these was the Mesopotamian civilization. Since agriculture is necessary for the establishment of any permanent settlement, the first urban societies emerged in regions where there was fertile soil, mild climate, and plenty of water. The Mesopotamian civilization grew up between 2 great rivers. The Tigris and Euphrates come together in what is now Iraq to form a series of fertile valleys near the Persian Gulf. The land between these 2 rivers is called Mesopotamia. Early people of unknown origin had lived in the Mesopotamian valley since prehistory times, planting grain and digging canals to water their crops. The first people that we know of to settle in Mesopotamia were the Sumerians. These people came from the rugged mountains to the east of the rivers. By 4000 BC, the Sumerians had established a complicated urban society based on agriculture. Perhaps the greatest contribution of the Sumerians was their invention of writing on clay. Using a reed pen, they pressed little wedge-shaped marks on wet clay, which was later baked. This writing, called cuneiform, started the record of events that make up written history. Many of these clay tablets exist today and give us an excellent picture of life as it was in Mesopotamia over 5,000 years ago. The first people to settle in Mesopotamia came from the rugged mountains to the east. What were these people called? Yes, we know much about their lives. What was the major contribution of the Sumerians to civilization? Right. Life in Mesopotamia was far from peaceful. In 2300 BC, the Sumerians were attacked and conquered by the Akkadians. The Akkadians were ancestors of the Arabs and spoke a language that is closely related to Hebrew. In 1750 BC, another invader, Hammurabi, conquered the Akkadians. He made Babylon his capital, and the region became known as Babylonia. All the people who settled in Mesopotamia cherished their religion. For this reason, it was natural that the priests would begin to dominate the society. The chief priest of a city was thought to be the earthly representative of that city's god. In Mesopotamia, religion and the state functioned as one. Slaves taken in wars were put in the service of the priests. Originally, the Sumerian government had intended that each city would have its own government. But due to the danger of foreign invasion, all the cities were put under a central control in 2300 BC. This was the first centrally controlled empire in the history of... What person dominated almost every aspect of life in Mesopotamian civilization? Yes. In 2300 BC, the first centrally controlled empire was formed out of what had been independent city-states. Hammurabi organized hundreds of laws into one set of laws. This set of laws is known as the Code of Hammurabi, and is probably the world's first social order based on the rights of the individual. Why did the Mesopotamians suddenly need a strong central government? Yes, another contribution made by the Mesopotamian civilization was economic specialization. In earlier settlements, each family had done every task for itself. In the highly structured community of Mesopotamia, man became specialized. They worked as artisans, farmers, or merchants. Each man did the thing he could do best, then traded his service for the products of others. This specialization helped Mesopotamian cities to become trade centers of the world. What factor in Mesopotamian communities led to economic specialization? Yes, the Babylonians, who controlled Mesopotamia until 538 BC, were the most religious of all the people in Mesopotamia. Their religion came directly from the beliefs of the Sumerians, with the addition of some new gods. Magic was highly respected, and prophets and soothsayers played an important role in all government decisions. Since many natural events were used by Babylonian soothsayers for foretelling the future, it was natural that the Babylonians would be great observers of nature. The Babylonians studied the stars, leading the way to the sciences of astronomy and mathematics. Babylonian priests could even predict the exact dates of eclipses, but their knowledge was used only as a part of their religion. The last great king of Babylonia was King Nebuchadnezzar, who overthrew Jerusalem and took the Hebrews into captivity. Babylonia and Mesopotamian lands continued to thrive until an attack in 538 BC by the Persians. Almost as quickly as it had risen, the Babylonian civilization crumbled into dust and sank back into the sands of the Tigris-Euphrates Valley. What was Mesopotamian religion largely based on? Yes, which two sciences originated in Babylonia as a part of their religious preoccupation with nature and the future? Right. What event caused the fall of Babylon and the end of early Mesopotamian civilization in 538? Yes, the Mesopotamian civilization was one of the first great civilizations. It was settled by the Sumerians, the Akkadians, and the Babylonians. The first great cities and social orders of the world were established by these people. The development of writing, building, and religion in the Mesopotamian civilizations was a major achievement for the development of other societies in years to come.